my secret. Just do something that ain't nobody ever done before, but make it sound like something that's always been there forever.
Welcome to This Filipino American Life, a podcast that explores the nuanced experiences of Filipinos in the United States. At Iba Pa, my name is Elaine Dololis, and I'm joined by my fellow hosts,
Ryan Carpio.
Like Clipper Ryan. Joe Bernardo.
and
Mike.
Producer
Mike.
Hit the horn. Yes,
Yes.
I love that you have to do it for yourself.
Damn it.
Hi, guys. How are y'all
Hi.
doing?
Good. Mike, your hair is getting long.
Just the one side.
Just the front. I gave him a haircut. I gave him a fade.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
I wasn't talking about the hair on your head.
Oh,
I'm
geez.
kidding.
Boom,
This is my new COVID mask.
He's holding up the TFAL flyer.
flyer. Keep holding it. I'm gonna take a picture of that because they're funnies.
COVID.
This episode is brought to you by our TFAL of the week, or the episode, Lawrence Trazo.
Yeah.
Lawrence.
Larry.
Is it Larry?
Ryan, you know him?
Laura, yeah.
Yeah.
Low. What up, Low?
Low T.
Low Traz.
LT. What's
Lies.
going on?
You lying liar. But thanks, Lawrence. We appreciate you, and thank you for supporting our podcast. You can also do so by becoming a Patreon at if you go to thisfilipinoamericanlife.com and then you go to support us, it'll link for the Patreon will be there because my brain doesn't work right now. It is bread. My brain is bread. Hey guys, what are we talking about today?
We're talking about multiracial Filipinos.
What does that
What?
mean?
A lot of races.
Multiracial,
Multi, meaning many.
many.
Um,
Those who identify as Filipino and perhaps another ethnicity, another race.
So if my parents tell me that we have Muslim blood and Chinese blood and Spanish blood, does that mean I am multiracial?
Yeah, if you want to identify that way.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
it's like any identity, right? It's kind of like socially constructed.
Oh, this is
What?
true.
That's deep. It's so deep. We just started. Oh my goodness.
You're just in the first step.
I know. My
Of the wonder.
goodness. Oh my God, it's so deep.
Just
Oh, my
dive right in.
goodness.
No, so yeah, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about how people who identify as Filipino and white, Filipino black, Filipino whatever. And we'll talk to Farzana Nayani a little bit later.
And do we get a lot of questions about this? I figure that this is one of our hot topics that we haven't actually had a chance to have an episode on.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we ran a book giveaway contest because Farzana has written a book called Raising Multicultural Children.
Mhm.
Multiracial family. Multiracial children.
Raising multiracial children. Sorry, I keep saying multicultural. Raising
Yeah.
multiracial children. Tools for nurturing identity in a racialized world. And the post got 456 likes or over, and there are over 42 comments. A good chunk of those are questions about the multiracial Filipinx experience.
Nice.
It's a lot of engagement, folks. A lot of
Yeah.
people want to talk about this topic.
It's a popular topic, I think, because multiracial folks, especially in the United States, are kind of one of the fastest growing populations. Definitely, a lot of Filipinos identify as multiracial throughout the world, and increasingly in the Philippines as well. So there's a lot more multiracial people who identify as multiracial Filipinos out there. So people want to talk about it.
Yeah. I feel like multiracial is very much like a word used now, like in my experience with my family, like they always say like mestiza or mestizo to talk about mixed Filipinos.
Yeah. I mean, it was like a social class, especially,
Mhm.
back in the day, where like, a lot of Spanish, a lot of Chinese intermarried with local people, and then developed like a kind of a elite class in Philippine society, especially in the 19th century. Yeah.
Oh, look at that, Dr. Joe dropping all those facts on us.
Stupid.
People are learning while listening to this episode, Joe.
Well,
Good job.
have you ever kind of looked at your kind of lineage and kind of seen quote unquote not Filipino people in your families, or maybe in your lineage first?
My uncle, I think, did a family tree, and on the family tree there are my matriarch has 3 branches. Like there are 3 families under her, because she had like different partners, I guess, and one of them is a Muslim sultan in
Oh, wow.
Mindanao. Another is the person who was my lolo, my great lolo, and the third is a French friar that was
French fry?
French fries. I'm not hungry. I really mean a friar who is French.
I thought it's like, wait, what does he do for a living? He works at In-N-Out. He
makes fries.
Makes fries.
Oh my god, you guys!
You mean like a friar, like a brother,
like a friar, like a brother, like a monk, like a religious person who was in
French friar. How would you like?
Close
your
to dinner
fries?
time, folks.
Well
I guess
done.
we're hungry.
My mastery of the English language is not that great. But yeah, so
or a Belgian waffler. What does he do? He actually just waffles. He doesn't have a good choices.
A turkey baster.
Oh my god, this is awesome. But to go back to the thing, yeah. So like, in my lineage, it's there, like a French person. I'm not gonna say a Frenchie, someone who is French. And my dad always says like that's why my nose is so big. Like he doesn't like
because of Gerard Depardieu.
No, he says like, oh, he doesn't have a flat nose. My dad doesn't have a flat nose. He has like a very prominent bridge, and he's like, that's why, because of my French, because of blah blah blah. And I was like, okay, whatever, Dad. But my dad also attributed to the fact like his Lola, he didn't call Lola. He called his Lola ma mère, which it means it's French. And I was like, okay. But then he's like, yeah, so we're part French. And I'm like, but Dad, do you see my skin? Like, it's pretty. There's no Frenchie there.
Wow.
I guess. But yeah, so like in my family that they try to drop it in, and I'm always been like, but we're just Filipino.
No,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Those things hilarious. It's like we're all super nose. Our noses. It's so good.
It's because you have big fingers.
Big fingers to go up your big nose to pick your big kalagot? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, going back to that, like I look very in chick, right? And I look very Chinese. I get mistaken for Chinese or Vietnamese or something, or people are surprised when I say I'm Filipino and I start busting out Tagalog, right? But the thing is, like, my uncles and my whatever have gone through like their family tree. I haven't found whoever the Chinese ancestors were, but it's there, and for me, I still don't kind of identify as being multi-ethnic or multiracial.
Yeah.
Right? I kind of just identify as being Filipino.
Yeah. Joe, what if you're part of a secret family?
It's kind of weird.
How about it?
I do I kind of had like some weird conspiracy theory that like my Lola like during World War II happened to like probably get with somebody like a Japanese soldier.
What?
I mean,
That
it's
is some
just,
super conspiracy theory.
but like I don't know, I can't prove that, and I don't want to, I don't want to prove that.
Yeah.
I am who I am.
Don't take a 23andMe because it will either
Yeah.
confirm or deny that story.
Yeah. How about
And
you all?
also clone you because they'll have all your DNA.
For me, so I grew up with my grandma raised me on my mom's side. My dad's parents died when he was young. My mom's dad died when she was young. But my grandma, she talked about just having Spanish blood, just because of the times that she grew, in the early 1900s. And so she actually would tell me that they were a Spanish-speaking household. And she threw around the word mestizo a lot. She threw around because her husband, or papa, our grandfather, who I never met, according to her, was just like a very light-skinned, like gorgeous man. He was like a very mestizo guy. So that's as far as I know in terms of like a kind of like a mixed heritage or a multi-race. But other than that, not really. Even outside of that, most of my family extended are in the Philippines. So I consider myself like a full Filipino. My mom and my dad are, both from Manila or Quezon City in the Philippines. So I don't really have any other family members that have married outside. Not that I can think of off the top of my head. So yeah, I'm pretty much Filipino. Yeah. What about you, Mike?
I don't know. We've never really dug into our family tree.
Yeah.
I mean, we're from a part of the Philippines that had a lot of Spanish influence, and so I think my mom tries to like lay it in there somewhere, but I don't think there's any. I mean, yeah. So our family's from Iloilo, and there's like a lot of the sugar trade happened, the galleon trade through there. My grandpa's name is Domingo, stuff like that.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's like there's no real like, oh, there's this Spanish lineage in our, other than theories,
Wait,
But-
was your grandpa born on a Sunday?
maybe, I don't know. It make a lot of sense, right? Actually, it would make a lot less sense if he wasn't. So,
Yeah, I mean, especially Philippine society, the whole mestizo-ness.
Mhm.
There's a social and real kind of currency,
Mm.
unfortunately, in the Philippines.
Mhm.
And it kind of goes into kind of the next question. I'm sure many people in your family or your friends have perhaps married other people or got with other people. How does your kind of family deal with that, or family has kind of accepted that or kind of rejected that, or what are their experiences of kind of them in multiracial relationships within your family?
I mean, it's funny because like I think there's obviously like different like people in our family that have kind of married people of other races, and so it never gets brought up as a subject, but it felt like it got brought up as a subject, at least when I was growing up, when I would be interested in somebody and they would kind of like strongly imply but not really say explicitly like, well, they're not Filipino, so it's not like, it's like, and maybe it's just like the like with everything that they did as like my parents, where they'd be like, we're okay with everything except for the fact that you're our kid and now you can't do anything that we don't want you to do, and so like we want you to like date someone who's Filipino and someone who's like a nice girl and all this other stuff. So it never came up as a subject until like I became like interested in people, and if it wasn't someone who's Filipino, my parents would have this look in their eyes like, okay.
Yeah. My family's pretty open about that. I think in general, like even with our friends or who we choose to date. I don't know. My family's we're pretty chill. My parents are pretty chill when it comes to that stuff. But experience wise, there's definitely some messages out there on multi-race or mixed heritage, like what will your babies look like, right? If you're mixed, if you had babies with a white person, oh, that would be awesome. Having a half white, half Filipino kid, they're gonna look so beautiful. Like all of these like implications on what that would look like. But it stops there, in terms of like the mixture of race is usually white, Filipino and white, that idea. So, but other than that, I think in general, my family's always been open to it. I have friends that are dating different races. I have friends who come from multiracial parents. So yeah.
In our family, we have a couple mixed kids in my like nieces and nephews area because my cousin's married outside Filipinos. It's been like mostly white people joining the family, and then like we have like my Thai cousin now, and so it's kind of like, I don't know. I feel like when my cousin was first dating her now husband, like it was like a big deal. Like, ooh, there's this white guy coming around. Like, ooh, we have to impress him. And like I felt bad for him because I think it was like they would make him read like these dirty jokes in Tagalog because he didn't know what it meant. So he would just read it phonetically, and then they would all laugh at him.
Yeah.
And I would be like, why are you doing this? And like, why are you doing this to Ati's boyfriend? That's so mean.
Yeah.
But he did it because it was like, this is how I'm going to get ingratiated into the family, right? You got to do that. But like it happened, I guess, like the one, not necessarily issue, but like learning point was like when my other ate like married a Jewish guy, and like my family was just like, what does this mean? Like we have to have 2 wedding ceremonies because we had to have the Jewish one and the Catholic one. Or like, what do you have to do all of this, and what, like the food and all this stuff? Like my parents were like, what do you mean you don't eat pork? Which I was like, technically he does because I've watched him eat lumpia and Christmas ham. So like, you know what I mean? Like there were certain things where there was a lot of cultural missteps, I want to say, just because my family had no experience with the Jewish faith or the culture. And so it's like, other than what they saw on like Seinfeld or like TV, but like family is family at the end of the day, for at least our family, and then you just accept them like, that is just my cousin, like this is what we do. And like I remember like we had a wedding and it was on Rosh Hashanah, and like my cousin, he fasted for all of the day, and like he broke the fast during happy hour at the wedding. He's like, I'm double fisting. And I looked at him, I'm like, it's Rosh Hashanah, you're double fisting booze, which means you've been fasting all day. You're gonna get hammered the moment you drink this. And he was like, yup. And he had this giant smile on his face. I'm like, it's gonna be a good wedding, it's gonna be a good party. But yeah, what about you, Joe?
I have kind of a multiracial cousins and nieces and nephews and stuff. Majority of my close cousins, it's funny, majority of my close cousins, the ones I kind of, we have our family parties, like they're all kind of Filipino American, right? The ones that they married. My brother married someone who's Thai. And then I remember my sister used to date somebody who was Vietnamese, and my mom didn't really care about the race part. She cared more about the religion.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, what are you gonna do about your kids? Are they gonna be Catholic?
Yeah.
So that was kind of more of an issue with my parents, as opposed to like kind of a different ethnicity or different race. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah. But yeah, we are going to talk to Farzana, correct, Elaine?
Correct. We're going to talk to Farzana Nayani, who is a diversity, equity, and inclusion specialist. She's also an author, an expert on multiracial issues, and matters, and
an old friend that we'll talk about, I think, in the next part of this episode.
Correct. So thank you for listening to this intro, and enjoy the break. Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Weren't you in a spoken word art thing in college?
Yeah. Yeah.
What was it called?
It was the 5-Star Arts Collective.
5 stars? 5 stars, like how I can rate our podcast, This Filipino American Life, on iTunes?
Yeah. Sure.
Have you rated our podcast on iTunes yet?
I haven't. Sorry.
What? What's,
I don't even subscribe. Sorry.
what?
What?
Oh my gosh, Ryan,
Blasphemy.
have you subscribed?
I have subscribed.
Have you rated us
I
on
have
iTunes?
not rated on
Maybe you
iTunes.
should do
I
that.
will do that.
I have a 5-star Converse.
Can you rate us on iTunes too, Joe?
Yeah, of
All right,
course.
cool.
Cool. So 5 stars, like how you rate your Lyft and Uber driver, 5 stars.
Sometimes.
So you should always rate them 5 stars.
Please rate us 5 stars because the more reviews we have, the more good reviews we have, we're gonna have more. It'll be easier for people to search us on iTunes.
Correct. And it's not like the only thing will come up is how to learn Tagalog.
Yeah. So far, if you Google or if you go on iTunes and search for Filipino, we are the third podcast that you find. We want to be number 1.
We're number 1. We're number 1.
We do not want to be behind how to learn Tagalog.
Oh no.
Yes. So rate us 5 stars, like Mike's 5-Star Arts Collective.
Or else I'll do some spoken word next time.
Oh no.
No.
Please, with these brown hands, do not do spoken word. But give us 5 stars.
Thank you.
And we're back. I hope
Woo.
you enjoyed that lovely commercial about joining our Ko-fi, Patreon, or whatever fun vendor that we support. Right, Joe? Right, Ryan? Right, Mike?
I guess
Sure. What day
Mike's
is
the one
it?
who puts it in, right?
Yeah, what day is it? I
I don't know.
But we're doing this episode and with a very old friend and special guest. Well, all our guests are special. Farzana Nayani.
Yeah.
Yay! Pew, pew, pew. Hey, Mike, you have the soundboard.
Oh, it's not on right now.
It's not plugged in. Never mind. Ooh.
Clapping right there. You see that?
We're pew, pew, pewing for you, Farzana.
Right on.
Thank you for doing this. This is our episode about multicultural Filipinos, or multiracial Filipinos. I'm sorry. And it's a very popular topic. My colleagues can speak upon how many folks have asked us about this subject.
Yes, many.
Millions.
Many.
Like millions.
Multi.
But of course, we wanted to talk to an expert on it. So
Right on.
An expert who is our friend and somebody that we've known for several years. We were actually rehashing it, how we got to know you. Farzana, could you tell us about your work and like how you got to this point, like your origin story in terms of your work in multiracial diversity training, equity inclusion specialist, author, researcher, all your many several hats.
Right. Oh, it's great to be here. Yes, I can tell you about my background. So I actually grew up in Canada. I was born there and I went to grad school at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I studied intercultural communication. And from there, I moved to LA and I ended up working in the nonprofit field doing business counseling and a lot of different other things for the Asian Pacific Islander community. So I was just really entrenched in like cross-cultural interactions all the time. And after doing that for about 10 years, I went into diversity, equity, and inclusion training full time. And a few years ago, I started my own firm. And so since then, I've been doing that ever since.
Wow. That is such a great, you are so perfectly media trained. I love it because you have like your one line. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. We met you in around 2007, right, Farzana?
Yeah, I can't believe it's been over a decade. Amazing.
I mean,
just last year? Like,
How old are we?
I was in college 2 years ago. What are you talking about? Mike, you worked with Farzana, right, at SIPA?
There was a little bit of overlap, right? I think I was about to head out to grad school around the time you were getting started. At Search of All Filipino Americans just yesterday. Feels like just yesterday, at least, right?
Right.
And
actually, if you think about it, like that's kind of the origin story for all of us at TFAL. If you think about it, 'cause we
believe
all
that.
kind of met through SIPA, other than me and Elaine, obviously, but we all kind of had some connection. And Elaine and Ryan, you guys knew each other, but like SIPA ended up becoming like a nexus that connected a lot of us.
Yes.
Yeah, and it sounds like you have a new role, Farzana, like you're back at SIPA?
So I'm doing work with the Asian Pacific Islander Small Business Program, doing SBA business counseling, which is what I did at SIPA, but now I'm doing it for the entire program, just to support during all the times that are going on right now. So that is a new role that I've taken up, just, as a contractor. It's a lot of fun. Nice to be back in the saddle.
Thank you for doing that work. It's very important work at this point in time right now, because we are trying to figure out how to support all of these small Filipino American small businesses. So it's great that like you have your previous experience and now can translate it now to it again. But we're here to talk about our experiences as multiracial Filipinos. So myself, Mike, Joe, Ryan, we are not traditionally multiracial Filipinos, although like in some way Filipinos always like to say like, I'm part Chinese, I'm part this, I'm part that, and like in the grand scheme of things that always ends up being you're Filipino. So how is it from the perspective, I wanted to ask like what inspired you to write Raising Multiracial Children, your amazing new book that I'm going to hold up because this will be a video somewhere.
Yeah.
This is your new book that you wrote. And like, what inspired you to do this type of work?
So I should start from my family origin story. So my mother's actually from the Philippines. She's from Bicol. And my dad is Pakistani. He's from Karachi, but my grandmother's from India. So I have roots in India. So I grew up as a multi-ethnic person in a multi-faith household. And, growing up with that was really interesting. I have a sister, so her experience also was slightly different because of how she looked. So she looks more Filipino than I do. And what I found is just growing up and the experiences I had that people who are mixed race really have this kind of unique sense of code switching or even having to prove themselves depending on the environment they're in. And growing up, it was something I experienced. And when I went to grad school, that was actually what my thesis was on. It was on looking at multi-ethnic Filipinos who are in Hawaii, the youth. And when I looked at that, I saw a lot of trends and patterns. And it's always been something that I've been intrigued with. So even though I was in the workforce for a long time, when the opportunity came to write about this, I was really intrigued to pick up the mantle again and continue my research. And I was able to do that because I've been on the board of an organization called Multiracial Americans of Southern California. They're a nonprofit based in SoCal. And they've been around for 30 years, over 30 years, doing activism in the community. And I was involved with them for the whole time I've lived in LA. So almost 15 years with them. And what we found in serving the community and doing various events is that folks have the same questions around how should I raise my kid? Or how do I talk to them about culture that's not mine? Or how do I deal with microaggression, like an insult that can happen indirectly? And so all of that happens all the time for multiracial families. And so we just kept seeing this over and over again. And what we did was we decided, the organization decided to put together its own book. And so we self-published a book. It's called Being All of Me.
Oh.
And it's the precursor to my current book. And so I'm the author on that. It's a 30-page illustrated guide on lesson plans and stuff. And so people were just so enthused to receive this. And so what happened was the publisher that I am working with now got a hold of this. It was actually at the LA Times Festival of Books. It was there. And when they saw it, they're like, we've got to do like a full version of this. So that's how I ended up with my publisher, North Atlantic Books. And the book is distributed by Penguin Random House. So I'm really grateful for that partnership between an independent book publisher based in the Bay Area and then a big distributor of books. So it can be widespread and found everywhere. And so now it's available. And what's exciting is in all that time, I became a parent too. So in addition to being multi-ethnic myself, I'm married to someone who's also mixed. He's Malaysian and German. So our kids are, you know, Filipino, Malaysian, German, and Pakistani. And so it's interesting to practice some of the strategies I talk about on my own kids. And of course they eye roll because it's like, oh, you're talking about that again, like all the time, because I'm so into it. But then in other ways, it's so natural for them that they're really used to it. Like today, we were having lunch and my older son, he just started picking up his food with his hand. And we're like, can you use your utensils? And you know what he said? He's like, yeah, but I'm Malaysian. And I'm Filipino. And he's like, I'm going to use my hands today. And we're like, okay, like Mr. Cultural Correspondent, like the clap back, we feel that, yeah, you're right. So go for it. So I think kids can learn a lot, and parents, if we're intentional, can really pass it on.
But as a parent, do you look at him and be like, I know what you're doing. Just use the utensils.
Yeah. You're just being messy. Okay. That's all you're doing is it was hash browns and he's picking up one thing at a time. We're like, really? We're like, really right now?
I've been that kid.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that there's a beauty in it being so natural. And I talk about this in my book, that the issue is not in the home a lot of the time. The issue is when you go out in the world and people start judging you, and they have an opinion, or they, you know, kind of want to mosey into the conversation. And this always happens for some reason at the grocery store. There's always some comment when you're standing in line. Someone's got to say something or make some kind of comment or ask. You know what happens a lot, especially with mixed families, you know, the person who is perceived to be the person of color, they're assumed to be the nanny. Right? Or they're assumed to not be, you know, the parent, like maybe they're some caretaker or something. So that kind of stuff the kids hear, and then if the parents don't debrief it, then the kids will have that sense like, oh, you know, my parents are different. My mommy looks like the hired help, right? And so that stuff gets permanently entrenched in society. So I don't know if you remember that CNN thing that happened. There was this white commentator, and he was in his home office.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to bring that up. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then when the kid came in,
and the kids came in, right? There's like the daughter and then the baby, right? Roll on up, and he's like pushing them back, and then the mom comes through, and she's Asian. Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah.
So the commentary, the media, as soon as that came out, the media said, "Oh, look at the nanny came in."
Yeah.
You know what's sucky? I thought it too.
Well, that's the thing. It's very common.
I've been trained to think that, and the worst of it is like the nanny experience. What happened to my cousin when my niece was born? She would like my ate would go out and like, you know, go for walks because she needed to like be out, and she would go to Target in the middle of the day with my niece, and like everybody thought she was the nanny. Like the other nannies at Target looked at her like, "Oh, you're one of us."
You're talking about your niece that's half white, right?
Yeah. My niece is. Yeah, she's mixed, and so I was always like, "I think, how did you feel?" Like, because I didn't know. Like, I was like, "Could you tell me what it was like?" And she kind of did the Filipino compartmentalized thing of like, "Well, it is what it is," and then she just like rolled it off, like whatever. Jade knows like that's my mom, and like, you know, I'm not the nanny. But I know that's when like that's like it's such a common experience. And then like I felt guilt when that CNN video came out, because like, why did I immediately go there? Like my brain has been trained to like, even if I know like mentally that that's not where to go, but like it was just that's like
your automatic association.
Yeah.
Your implicit bias.
Exactly, it is. It's unconscious bias, and I think in particular with the Filipinx community, because a lot of our community members are folks who are in the caregiver role, that is a common perception, and it's real, that when you have a parent who is a parent, and then they're mistaken for being the nanny, even of their own children. Like, imagine how traumatic that can be over and over again for the kids to have that experience. So it's sad in a way. It's something we need to talk about as a society in terms of who we perceive to be like the rightful parents or caregivers. And I think the more we are out about being mixed, and we see more of it in the media, or we talk about it like this, or we see it in books, then people's reconfiguration in their minds can happen. But if we only see monoracial families over and over again in ads or just general storylines, then that can't ever happen. It's just going to be something we think of second.
Yeah. Or another implicit association is that it was some kind of like, if it's like a white man and a Filipino woman, it's like some kind of mail order bride situation or something like that, or some kind of like Asian fetish situation.
Or military.
Yeah, military.
Like,
yeah.
Think of like historically those types of unions only. And so I used to get that when I would tell people I'm mixed. I mean, if they didn't know my dad's Pakistani, because that's a different dynamic, but they would say, oh yeah, or were your parents in the military? Or just because it was like unheard of for them to think of two people falling in love who are different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a sort of a personal question for you, Farzana. Growing up, and now that you have this book about how to raise multi-racial children, right? When you were growing up, was it ever explicit with your parents? Was, like your own experience of, growing up in a multiracial household, was it ever explicitly said to you, this is who you are? Or was it sort of just a natural, because I imagine a lot more people don't necessarily think about it right away. They have a normalcy to upbringing. Like, oh yeah, of course you are, because we know you are. But I know most of the topics in your book is it's never too young to start teaching your kids about their backgrounds. But was it different for you when you were growing up? Was it just kind of like, did you know you were multiracial at an early age, or did you sort of like realize it a lot later in life?
That's a great question. I think for me, growing up where I grew up, being a person of color stuck out more than being mixed. I think it was just like that brown kid. Like I would get made fun of for being like the darker skin or the brown kid, or, different, just difference, right? So I think for a lot of people, that's really primary. Secondarily, it's also being an immigrant. So the language, the accent, just trying to assimilate. Right. And I think that's true in many Filipinx families. So that was another thing. So those two things in my upbringing were really more prominent.
Yeah.
So for my parents, they were just trying to get us to fit in. And so, they didn't teach us the language. I had to learn it later. And they were really concerned with us doing well in school. So discussions about race and racial identity were not there in that way. They did it really reinforce culture, though. Like, oh boy, because I lived with both of my grandmas at various points in their lives. And so I had the Philippine grandma living downstairs, and she'd have people over and have the karaoke going and like that whole day, and like a lot of like activity and stuff like that. And then I had the really somber Pakistani grandmother, and they'd have the different religions going. So I was just like code switching. Like if you can picture the upstairs and downstairs, upstairs, downstairs, upstairs, downstairs, sideways, like that's just how I lived. It wasn't a cohesive multiracial identity. It was this code switching all the time. And so for me, that's what it was. But what I'm trying to kind of position here is that you can have that. And there's this other concept of a multiracial person who is holistic. And it wasn't until I left Canada, went to Hawaii, and really got into my Filipina, side, really, my identity there, that I was like really active and organizing and doing stuff for the World War II veterans, and like, a lot of like leadership youth programs for the Filipinx community. Then when I came to LA, I was like, who am I going to be? Because in Canada, I was like more South Asian. It just happened that, Vancouver folks, there's a lot of South Asian people. So I was just really involved with that. Then in Hawaii is different. When I moved to LA, that was when I really became more cohesive.
Mhm.
So location makes a difference, but I think for a lot of families, it's usually this and that, less so the whole like it coming together.
Mhm. I know. So in your book, you talk about how, when you are raising multiracial children, you do have to talk about race, and then you can't just be colorblind, right? The notion of colorblindness is so popular, but you shouldn't apply it to multiracial folks. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that notion and that theme across your book?
Well, yeah. So when interracial couples get together, there's always some sort of racism that they experience either from society, looking at them like they shouldn't be a couple, or maybe their own families have some sort of bias that they need to overcome. So the thing that heals that for a lot of couples is love. Love overcomes. So that's the primary coming together of a couple, right? So what happens is they translate that into their parenting. They're like, oh, you're multiracial. Well, we love you. That's all you got to worry about, because that's what got us through. So that intention is really positive. It's we're going to protect you with this capsule of love, and just go out in the world and you'll be fine. But that color blindness is actually super damaging, because the child can phenotypically, like physically, look a certain race and then be perceived that way. And if they've never talked about it because they've been in this like temple of love only, then they are not prepared. So I feel like you need to have the conversation about identity, then have the conversation about bias that can exist, and then come back with the love. Like all of that is in love, not ignore the stuff. And only it's like saying, I had a mentor teacher when I was in school, when I was trained to be a classroom teacher. That was like my first ever career. And I had a mentor teacher, and she said, oh, when I'm teaching students, I don't see differences. And so that color blindness, again, it's well intended, but then that just means you're overlooking, the cultural nuances and differences and things that make people who they are. So in the same way, when a parent like washes over that, like your family member even, right, Elaine? Like when you wash over it, you're trying to do it out of love, but that kid is still going to go to college and deal with what group do they fit into. That kid is still going to have to go to high school and pick which friends, which they're playing basketball, and like, do they hang out with the white kids, or do they hang out with the Filipinx kids, or whatever, So they're going to have to make those decisions and figure out who they are. And if it doesn't come at home, then they learn from their friends, or most of the time, really what the trend is, they figure it out in college, because they start taking ethnic studies class, like what Joe teaches, or they join like the clubs.
Like a HAPA Issues Forum. That was like a big one in Irvine.
And that's the only time
still going.
They first start ever talking about it, if they don't get it at home. And up until that point, imagine all the trauma and microaggressions they feel until, they're 16, 17, 18 with no one to talk to,
And parenting, I'm not a parent. I'm sort of like learning what parenthood is as I get older. But there's this idea of like an honest conversation, especially with Filipino parents. We talked about this in the past about being sort of like passive and loving, and like different ways of showing love. And I think there's an honesty piece that is very important, the way you said it. Like love doesn't mean like sugarcoating everything. That's not really what love is. Love is not always pleasant. Love is sometimes discipline, and sometimes it's an honest conversation about whatever it is: race, sex, problems with abuse or drugs, or all of these things that we can't just turn a blind eye on. So I appreciate you saying that, because we're talking about multiracial and raising multiracial children, and I can't even imagine how deep that is when it comes to what you say, language, culture, and to acknowledge all that. So that's really deep, and I appreciate it. And
all right, You know, you just have to sweep everything under the rug.
It's the Filipino way.
Put it in the closet. Never see it
Yeah,
again.
never talk about
Under
it.
the bed.
I didn't see that.
Oh man.
Ryan, I thought you were rewriting Corinthians. Love is patient, love is kind.
I was gonna get there.
I was
gonna
like,
get there.
love does not always mean sugarcoating. I was
Yeah.
like, are you making
Well-
it negative?
Well, because it's part of the theme of the book about this idea of color blindness, right? Or the idea that everyone should be treated the same. I don't think that's true. Like there's no, like, treating everyone the same is sort of not. It's not real. It's
Yeah.
not real. It's nice, but it's a disservice. So
Yeah.
that's what I would say.
Well, like we want to get there. Like I
Right.
feel like you acknowledge the differences and inequity in society, and then from there do something about the inequity, and
Exactly.
then from there we can heal and be united.
Mhm.
Exactly.
But we need to go through those stages.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like saying stuff about the African American community. We'll just get over slavery. It's like no, it doesn't
Right.
work that way.
Right.
It's not work that
Right.
way.
It doesn't work that way. Like
No.
it's not we're all equal now. Well, you can go no. It,
Right.
Yeah.
Like that's not how it works. So
Yeah.
like you have, but I do believe in unity. Like that's one thing my
Yes.
parents taught me, especially with the faith thing, because they had different religions, which if you think about it, that could be a whole episode on
Yep.
its own.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then they always taught me just that we have, commonality in that. Like if you believe that's the thing in common, don't look at the differences of that so much. So I think like we can get there, like if
Mhm.
we have those conversations and like really do that inquiry, but bypassing around it through color blindness, it's an issue. It may not feel like that in the beginning when they're young, but it will manifest later.
So you talk a lot about teaching about race to your children. What specifically about being Filipino do you teach your children?
So I have a harder time with specifically like the things I was taught because I don't have family around in LA where I live now. So the best way I can teach them about it is to expose them to my family and to take them to the Philippines, and also to expose them to family friends who are of the cultures that I am. And then I feel like what I'm teaching them is that sense of community, that sense of family, that sense of the values, so things like respect your elders. That can only happen when you're around elders, and I yell at you to go and do something for the elders. That's how you're going to learn, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I teach them. And we talk about like geography a lot. So I have this big map book. It's literally life size. It's like 3 or 4 feet high, and we look at that a lot, like where the geography is. We have a globe, and then we talk about language a lot. I think that's a good entry point. And then food's a good entry point. But those are like still surface level. Like you want to get into more. So I think what families kind of do is they start there, but they end there. And then it's like food, fun, and flags. It's just multiculturalism like 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
And that for a lot of families can feel like enough, but you have to go deeper than that and then talk about everything. So, you can talk about history, or you can talk about, hero figures, right? A friend of mine wrote a book called Little Heroes of Color.
Oh, I love that book.
David Heredia, and he's Dominican, married to a Mexican woman. And so he wanted figures for his children to see, positive figures from different cultures. So things like that, for example. So I try to do that, and I point things out, and I hit them over the head with it, and it gets ingrained. Like I was telling you about my son, and they get it. Like I think they get it. Now, for me, of course, I have some imposter syndrome around not being enough. Like I'm not Filipina enough, or I'm not Pakistani enough. That's always going to be there, and it's going to get, it'll peter out after a while, where it's like, this just is what it is. Like this is the combination that we have, and this is how culture looks. And I can't cook as well as my cousins do, but okay, when they know that kuya and ate, they know like go bless. They know when they see them, these are your titos. Like they know, like it's full on Filipino time. like they get the whole, like the code switching. They just figured out. The kids learn, so they get immersed in it. These are your kuyas. Go play with them, and boom, like. So that's kind of how I'm teaching them.
Have you taught them, you know, kind of the more nuanced stuff in terms of like, you know, how Filipinos could be racist, how could Filipinos could be like colorist? Have you talked about like colorism to them, or how do you plan to do that if you haven't?
Can I tell the story of when my
Of
oldest
course.
son was born? Oh my
Yes.
gosh. So we were in the hospital. The first one I had was in the hospital. The second one I did was at a birth sanctuary with a midwife. But anyway, so the first one was in the hospital, and it was a Filipino nurse, and she was giving him a bath, like his first bath ever. He was like a day old, and she's like, you know, kind of like drying him off or whatever, and she's like, "Ooh, his color is so nice. He's fair. Like this is the perfect color." Like, boom, he's a day old. You know? Like, not even, like, just came out of my womb. Like, you know how we exaggerate just out of the womb? He literally was just out of my womb. And the colorism happened. And it was from a Filipina.
Oh, man.
So
man.
that's how entrenched this stuff is in our own communities,
Mhm.
right? And so luckily, my mother, she never passed that on to me. Like I didn't grow up with a complex or that internalized sense of colonialism. For colorism, there's other, you know, examples of that. But I know, like I see my cousins and they use the papaya soap, or you know, my grandmother, like he was always careful about staying out of the
Don't go
sun.
outside.
Yeah, and the creams and the Shiseido products, right? Like, come on, we all have family members that go off on all those creams and lotions and
Yeah.
stuff, right?
They don't work.
And like, it's hard because that's been impressed upon our community from the greater society, which is a result of imperialism over centuries. And I feel that it's hard. It's hard when they experience that. So I think for my kids, you know, I point out about differences in general. And what I did early on, to answer your question, is I got a hold of, and it's in my book, I have a whole chapter on resources and supplies, even like types of books and different things. And this is the full version. Okay, it's bigger. And
Wait,
so
what version do we have?
you have
Yeah.
the galley copy, which is like
Galley.
the preview special copy. There's only
Yeah.
like a dozen copies of this.
Oh,
You
got
got
it.
to hold it before it was published. So now the bigger version.
Okay.
So in that, I mentioned these crayons. They have these multicultural crayons from different brands, and this one brand is called People Color crayons. They have 24 or so different skin tones,
Cool.
and so I made my kids use those at an early age. And can I admit what I really did?
Yes.
So I took out all the light colored ones, and I was like, I would only admit that here, okay? So I took out the light colored ones. I'm like, you need to use these medium to dark skin tone. And they're like, Mom, what are you doing? Like, this is so weird. Like, you know, because they're used to the peach color crayon,
Yeah.
the Crayola box. So after a while, they got used to it. And because I'm like, you're doing your homework, you're using these colors. This is your color range. And then I put the other ones back in. But what I found was over time, they just naturally became used to it, and they compare. They're like, oh, Dad's this color, or this person on TV is this color. And I would ask them. So I'd say, your friends, what color are they? And they have African-American friends, they have Asian friends. And so there's like Latinx friends. And so it's different skin tones. And so they just did a self-portrait a couple weeks ago, and it was all like brown skin tone.
Nice.
Oh, that's cute.
On their own. They did it on their own.
Yeah.
I didn't have to say
Yeah.
something. So,
You guys
yeah,
remember
it was
when
positive.
Crayola used to have that color as flesh?
Yeah.
It was
Peach.
called that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
When I was a
think
kid,
so.
I remember it being called flesh.
And I
They
remember
should do a version where flesh is like all the colors
all
are
of them.
called
Yeah.
flesh.
I mean, that's
They
what
do
That's what she was talking
that's
about.
the
yeah.
Yeah,
the
Crayola
coloring
has
section.
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have it. It's multicultural crayons. So
That's
Crayola has a
really-
version too. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. See, it's totally about like instilling it in your children early. Because I have a distinct memory of, it's a SEPA story, but I remember one of the youth programmers, they were telling them, they were like painting their own portraits, like coloring the sheet, right? Or no, they had to like paper mache a head that's supposed to be them, right? Like sculpt their bust. There was one kid who made a white person, a white peach bust,
Mhm.
and the hair was blonde and the eyes were blue.
As
And
a
I was
self-portrait?
as a self-portrait. And I remember going, is there a white kid at SEPA that I don't know? Like where is this white kid?
Zach Morris.
and then the person who it was this little brown girl. And she
Oh,
picked
see?
it up, and I just looked at
Wow.
her. I looked at her and I was like, honey, that's not what you look like in the mirror. That's not what you see. And I was like, who is I didn't do anything. Like, I will admit this. I did nothing because I was in my early 20s. It wasn't my role. I would have been like a complete stranger telling this kid, like, you have a really odd sense of self. But I just, I know I took it away thinking, I wish that girl had more empowerment and more belief in their beauty and themselves, that if when they created a bust,
Mhm.
it actually looked like who they looked. So
Mm.
Maybe her mom was one of those Filipinas who dyed her hair blonde and put like blue contacts on.
so that's why.
Those
Super.
import show off models.
So I'm wrong because they're not trying to be white. They're trying to be an import show off.
They're trying to be like their mom. Nah, I kid.
I mean, but that's deep though, what you
Yeah.
just shared. And so, and I want to qualify. So this, when I pulled out the crayons, I'm not being anti-white or anti-light skin. If that's who you look like, that's great. What I'm trying to do though is offset this default position, which is probably what this girl's experiencing, where Barbies are blonde and blue-eyed, and now they have a range. But it took until 2020 to get to that. So up until that point, our default position, and if you look up the research on books that have been written by children's authors, the majority are still predominantly white characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so Asian characters, for example, are, you know, under 5% or 10%, right? African-American characters are also the same. There are more characters in children's books that are animals and fire trucks than there are people of color still. So
that makes me
so
sad.
as a result, people like us have to be like super intentional, and then we have to go like gangbusters on, like, we need the brown characters in the books. We need like the dolls that are like super, you know, dark and have different textured hair, and the crayon, like, so we have to go like, you know, gorilla like level on this stuff, because in order to counter it, you have to be like that. That's not saying that I'm, you know, downplaying anyone who's got white heritage, etc. I'm just saying, like, let's reset what the default is to make it more representative. So I think that's really important.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joe.
So first, I wanted to switch topics. So
Sure.
Go for it. Go for it.
okay, cool. So actually, just kind of going back to the whole, you know, experiences of, you know, multiracial folks, especially multiracial Filipinos. You know, what are some of the factors that shape their identities? I know you talked about before about code switching and doing that and feeling the what is that? The pressure to kind of not feeling enough, that imposter syndrome. What are some other ones? Other kind of issues that a lot of multiracial Filipinos or just multiracial folks in general kind of grow up with?
That's a great question. When I put together the research for this book, I had sent around a survey, and I had over 300 people respond to the survey with examples of things that they've experienced, and also quotes. And so in the final version of this book, I actually have quotes, and I have a lot of folks who are Filipinx identity. And there's a lot around not being enough, right? There's a lot around having to prove yourself, whether it be, do you speak the language? Have you been there? That kind of thing. So constantly being tested, or maybe even ridiculed for having not knowing things about their culture, not being exposed. In my original research, when I was back in grad school, another one was who they're raised by. So if they have a divorced family, what can happen is if they're not exposed to the culture, they might feel alienated. And so there's this one young man who I met, and he was raised by his white dad, and he had such a negative view of Filipinos. Like, he was like, they're just working fast food places and stuff. Like, and I'm like looking at him, I'm like, really, right now? Like, you are Filipino, like your mother literally, but because he wasn't, raised in that way, he didn't have that connection. And so it's very sad. So not to judge anyone's experience or to belittle it. I'm just saying that it can really cause an issue when we're not exposed to it or we're constantly measured. And in my first book, I have this whole activity about that. It's called the multiracial yardstick. So check it out.
Ooh.
So it's a lesson plan where, like, the questions we constantly get asked. So the top one is, what are you? Right? And then after that, you get asked, do you eat the food? Do you speak the language? And then when you get older, who do you date? Right? Like who are your friends? So those are all tests for how blank you are, like how Filipinx you are, how whatever you are. And so I think when people do that, family members and society, then people who are multiracial will never live up to it. And so the key is to really instill a sense of identity. Like, I don't need to check 10 boxes in order to choose this identity. I'm cool with that. And at the same time, Filipino people need to be cool with not checking all those boxes. But then the other part is the exoticism. So we're fine with the mestiza look. We're fine with the, like, artista who's like, got the prominent nose, who's got white facial features.
All the Miss Universes.
We can accept those standards of beauty and then claim that as Filipinx identity without any issue. So why do we have a problem with a darker skinned person, like a black and Filipina person, right? You see the difference?
Yeah.
That stuff is real. We have colorism and anti-black sentiment a lot in our community. It's hard to have to admit that, but it's true. So it's even the mixes aren't all equal, how people deal with different groups. So it can be really difficult for kids. So that's why it's important to have the conversation.
How do you feel about Filipinos just in general who like to claim another person's identity? Who's someone who's famous, who happens to be like, part Filipino, but they themselves don't necessarily like identify themselves fully as Filipino or whatever. Like, I remember people used to say like, oh, Prince is part Filipino, so he's one of us.
Is he short?
But maybe the thing is, I think is like there was an interview saying that like his grandfather or great grandfather, something like that, where he was.
I remember seeing that too.
Yeah. So, but then, But how do you feel about? Well, I mean, how do you feel about as a multiracial person, someone claiming your heritage, just for their own purposes?
To like make themselves feel good.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So in the end, it's up to the person claiming that identity, right? So in my heart, I would hope and wish that they would have a choice in the matter, at least have thought about it and then choose. So if they choose a monoracial identity that is or is not Filipinx identity, that's more power to them, but at least have they done that journey, right? So there's a scholar and author, her name is Dr. Maria P.P. Root, and I love to talk about her. She's the godmother, I like to call her the godmother of the multiracial community, and she happens to be Filipina as well as white.
Oh, Farzana cut out.
Oh, so Dr. Maria P.P. Root has written a work called The Bill of Rights for people of mixed heritage. And it talks about how people have a choice in the matter. Like, I have the choice to choose who I am or who I'm not, right? So in the end, and it can change over time. So in the end, it really is up to the person. So I can't judge a person claiming that. I may have issue if like they're repping it for cultural appropriation purposes, you know, like then it gets into this gray area of like, oh, now you're repping it because it's going to get you somewhere. So that part, it's fuzzy. You can't really like put your finger on it completely, but you can tell like who's into it, or maybe some people are discovering it for the first time, right? So I'm cool with that. Like if people want to explore and they haven't had that opportunity before and now it's surfaced for them, that's great. But what's happening is, and I talk about this in a contemporary issue chapter of my book, DNA ancestry, right? So now all of a sudden people are like, oh, I'm part this, and I'm going to go run to that country. And now I'm like repping the flag of the thing because I'm 3% of it. And, you know, and so I've talked to friends who work at multicultural student services offices on campus, and they see that a lot with Native American ancestry, where people took the DNA test and then they say, oh, I'm part Native American. What can I get for this? What scholarships can I get? Boom, out of the blue. So that kind of stuff, it's like, ooh, that's really touchy. Like we have such a, you know, really punctuated history around race and what we're able to have as a result of race and reparations. So I think it's like a longer conversation around it. It is really up to the person, but I would hope that they're not doing it for appropriation purposes.
I have friends that I used to be very judgy about it, you know, in terms of like what you can claim. But thank you for bringing that up, because there are folks who phenotypically don't look Filipino, for example, who present African American, for example, and throughout their lives, that's how they've been looked at, and only rediscovering their heritage maybe in college or something like that. So I appreciate you saying that, because I think all of this is kind of like self-discovery, even for like people like me who's not multiracial, you know, rediscovering kind of like what Filipino-ness is, and what this podcast has been really about is to try to engage people in a very in a very nuanced way, right? So I think that's an important thing to point out is you know, people are going through their journey. You know, you talk about like, you know, how people looked at you. That's a huge factor in how you react and how you either shun a certain part of your heritage or laud it, right? And so, you know, there's folks out there who phenotypically look good and therefore say I'm mixed, and that's their thing, right? And it stops there, like I'm mixed, you know. So, and we kind of go back into this, you know, mixture of what, and do you actually know what that is, right? So I think that this topic is so big, and I love that we're talking about it, and there's a reason you probably got those 300 responses. But anyway, I have no question for you, but I just wanted to point out that that's awesome. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Ryan.
That a lot.
What was that?
Ryan likes to have a long compliment.
Yeah. Well, part of it is because I'm discovering a lot of these things, and I'm sort of an audience of our podcast. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, I'm listening to an expert who wrote a book about this, and I'm learning so much. And I wanted to sort of let people know who are listening. I'm like, I'm listening too, and this is amazing. You know, like this is really, really good. So
Ryan wants to give Farzana her flowers now while we're like talking over Zoom, because we can't be together in real life.
I know.
All the compliments.
Yeah. But,
well, can I jump off one thing that you said, Ryan?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
What happens is sometimes people claim mixed identity because in society, people reinforce like all mixed babies are cute and mixed people are good looking. And so when people adopt the mixed identity, people are like, are you repping that just because you want to be that? And so it's like, it's tough because sometimes it's deeper than that. You know, you want to be all of those things. But then people will say, oh, you're just trying to be better than me because you got a touch of that you got to sprinkle of that, and
Mhm.
you're mestiza. And so are you trying to be better than me? Like, are you turning your nose up at being monoracial?
Mhm.
And so there's like a pain there where sometimes claiming mixed identity makes other people feel really bad. And that is hard to deal with, because I don't think necessarily people are trying a lot of the time to like put people down, but because society uplifts people who are like racially ambiguous more than monoracial, you know what I'm saying? Then
Yeah.
you get a privilege with it. And
Mhm.
so it's like when people say, oh, you're trying to pass as white.
Mhm.
And it's like, a lot of people are not trying to pass as white. They just look it.
Yeah.
So when they walk down the street,
Yeah.
they get the privilege of it. Is that
Yeah.
their fault?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
there's another way to say it. We say, okay, they're being read as white. So
Mhm.
the agency is not on them like trying to be some kind like
Right.
one up somebody. They're just, that's how they're read. So do you see the energy is like
Yeah.
how the other person perceiving,
Yeah.
That's really cool.
like
Yeah.
that like difference. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because like, personally, I mean, Mike can speak to this too. Like the two of us, like Mike and myself, we don't get read as Filipino. Like a lot of the
Exactly.
and we
Yeah.
are full-blooded. Well, I'm full-blooded Filipino. Mike's mom was gonna tell you that you're Spanish and blah blah blah. But
Filipino.
Filipino.
Elaine is Mike's nanny.
I'm Mike's nanny because I'm so dark. I mean, Mike has even said that we are ebony and ivory.
Oh my God, let's not get
together.
into that.
But like, where am I going with this? I'm totally lost track because of
Oh,
the
sorry.
joke.
I'm sorry.
No, but it's like because we because the two of us were Filipino, but we don't present as Filipino, right? And so for the whole idea of being full, to say full, or to say I'm half white, I'm half this, I'm half that. Like I've heard from other folks that like to stop trying to quantify it numerically.
Yeah.
Because a person is not half like Farzana, I'm trying to get this language right. You're not half Filipino, you're not half Pakistani. You're Filipino Pakistani. Like a whole person. Because
can I give you some snaps for that?
you can't be like these brown hands are both Filipino and Pakistani for Farzana, not Elaine. But you know what I'm saying? Like I wish that language would be what is the norm. Like my niece, I want to, when I talk about my niece, I'm like, she's white and Filipino. I'm not going to be like, she's half because like she's both. And I want my niece to, and my nephew to like acknowledge that they're both. Or my other nieces and nephews that are like, they're Thai Filipino. I'm not going to be like, you're half Thai, you're half Filipino. I'm like, nah, bro. You are both. You are a big little kid, and you are both Thai and Filipino.
Say it, Joe.
What are you trying to say? What are you trying to say?
When they're dead, they're patay.
I saw Joe like have this little smiley eyes. I was like, oh, a dad joke is coming. It's coming. This is gonna be good. I don't know. Man.
Yes, Joe, put one in. Yes.
I have a quick like statistics question. And for the statistics folks out there, I imagine because of globalization, there's going to be a lot more, like generationally, a lot more folks that are multiracial. I don't know if you guys have studied that or if there's truth to that, but in terms of, you know, now that travel is a lot easier than it was 100 years ago or even 50 years ago, maybe quote unquote acceptance of multiracial marriages and family, you know, that puts a factor into it. Is that a trend that we're seeing? And if it is a trend that we're seeing, is it reflected in like, you know, forms that we fill out, whether or not you can, you know, but am I right in thinking that the trend is more and more multiracial families are out there? And is there studies associated with that you've come across?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we look at, for example, historically, when there's been purposeful mixing. So for example, the plantation history in Hawaii, That's why there's so much mixing.
Mhm.
And to come back to Elaine's point about fractionalizing people, when you say half and half, then you are quantifying a person, and it can make someone feel objectified or reduced, right? And so when we say I'm this and that, it's empowering. So it takes practice, because the shortcut is just to say half and half, because you just want to give the picture, like I'm a quarter, so then you know it's a grandparent. Like we do that just to like help people visualize. But for example, in Hawaii, where they've had such a long history of mixing, people don't do that. People don't say quarter and half. They say all the things. They don't ignore any either. So they don't just say I'm Howley or whatever. They say I'm this, like I'm literally Scottish, German, Filipino, like Hawaiian, and Puerto Rican. They list all of them. And that's a model for us, because they've had historical mixing through that's why there's pidgin. Pidgin is a mishmash of all the different words. So when we fast forward to a country like Canada, where I grew up, the census data shows that over time there's more generational mixing. So the longer a culture or a community has been in a country, they mix more. And when you look at the Japanese community, they actually have names. So they have Issei, Nisei, Yonsei. Like they're a perfect model to explain the generations and receiving it and embodying all of that as Japanese. Like they don't say they're that. They say we are that, because if they don't, they're going to diffuse out and not be Japanese. So over time, in the US as well, the other factor around census data is people being comfortable with actually marking it. So because racist policies, people like they didn't want to claim it. So when you match up, it's fascinating. I write about this in my book. When you match up census data and Pew Research data, census data says what race are you, and then you check it. Pew asks it different. They ask what race you are, but then they ask what race your parents are. When they match it, they're actually more mixed, because they have parents of different cultures. They just didn't claim it because they didn't feel comfortable claiming it or whatever. So it's about like not only the mixing, but like how comfortable we are claiming the mixing. So deep.
It is so deep. I'm like, oh, so many things to
This
process.
This is great.
But it's kind of like, I mean, the JA model, the Japanese American model, I wish like Filipinos had that. Like I want to be like, you're Isa, and then I'm Dalawa, or something. Like I want to like that would be cool.
Right now.
But that's Tagalog focused, and what if you're not? You know what I mean? It's like,
Well,
so
let's
it's
make
hard.
another one, and we'll like TFAL brand it. You know.
Yeah.
Well, we did talk about that, like isang, dalawang, tatlo.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Seriously, because then there's belonging in society, and then people wouldn't have to ask anything, right?
Yeah. I want to acknowledge our Instagram book giveaway winner, because they gave the question. And also, I'm going to say her name. She has a very pretty name. So Fatima Gloria Shazad was our winner of your book, Raising Multicultural Children, not the galley copy, the legit copy with more resources.
Congratulations.
Yay.
Yay, that one.
Okay, too.
So her question is, I think about this all the time as someone who tries to connect with her own two cultural backgrounds, Pakistani and Filipina, of parents who were immigrants and didn't necessarily look to instill their individual cultural values, but their shared broader values instead. I would love to know, how do you authentically instill the sense of being multicultural and multiracial in your children, especially if you are continually striving for a deeper connection and your spouse is also from a completely different experience? So I feel like that question is like this entire podcast.
Yeah. Well, I've got actually a quick answer that is a good start for people. It's just to have curiosity. Like you keep asking questions. So that is the best tool I can offer. I think when you're figuring things out, you just say that with your kids. So if it's like, I don't know this, I wonder, what do you think? And then you have a dialogue. So for example, when I was researching my book, I watched this movie called Loving Day. And it's about the history of anti-miscegenation in this country when folks who are different races couldn't marry and the couple ran away, right?
Mhm.
So I didn't expect to be watching this with my kids, but they kind of got all up in, you know, where I was, and we're like looking over my laptop, and like, you know, sniffing around, what am I doing? And they started watching, and so I paused it and I said, okay, well, what would you do? What would you do? So my 7-year-old said, well, they gotta stay in love and be together. And I'm like, okay, well, that means they can't live in this state that they were in. They need to leave. And he said, well, then you gotta go. And he's like, this is what he said. He's 7. He's like, you gotta do what you gotta do.
You gotta do. See, your 7-year-old is so smart.
It's ethics. So you're teaching them ethics. And I was like, I don't know what I would do in that time, because you leave your parents, you leave your siblings, you leave everything you have, but you have to go to a different state. What would you do? And he's like, you got to do what you got to do. I'm like, okay, I asked the question. He answered it. So I may not have all the questions, and the person asking the question or anyone who's listening may not have all the answers, right?
Mhm.
But if we keep asking, then we can foster learning together. And that's just the best approach to all of this.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to acknowledge, like, we're all learning in this experience together, right? Like, there isn't going to be like a final answer to any of these or any of the questions that people pose, just because we're all learning. And like, we are of a similar age, and we had immigrant parents who are trying their best to get to give us a life, right? Like, give us a life here. And so they didn't have the presence of mind to be like, we're going to teach you these other values about like what it means to be, well, Farzana, for you, like they're going to like draw the line as to how it means to be both. They're just going to be like, you are both. So you are both, and so you're going to live both. And so I think that's an important mode that I want to put out to folks listening. Like, the questions are great, and you have and I know that folks are always going to ask questions and look for answers, but like, I also would like the challenge and be like, I think you have the answer with you. Like, you have the answer. It's so Paulo Coelho, the answer is inside you. It's home has been the answer all along. But I mean, it's true. Like, you're going to search your lifetime for all these answers, and then like, you're going to stop and look in the mirror and realize the answer has been there all along. It's gonna be, I don't know how I got there, but I did.
Well,
but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I love it. And I think as much as I'm giving advice, it's really a person's individual journey and the family's individual journey. And we can't judge other people, and we shouldn't judge ourselves. Like, we just need to be gentle with ourselves to do what we can. And that's enough. And so when I talk about my journey, if you hear how I'm talking about it, I'm not blaming my parents for how they raised me. They did their best dealing with being people of color and immigrants, and, you know, trying to make it. And so adding a complex racial dynamic to that without having, you know, all of this vast experience and resources, it's insurmountable, right? To put that as an expectation. So I think everyone's situation is different, and we do what we can. And that's why it's great to have the conversation. And the more we expose our kids and ourselves to different types of families, then we just sort of get to know it.
Well, thank you. Does Joe, Ryan, that seems to be a great way to end this, but do you have any other questions?
No. I mean, my only thing is, I know there was a bunch of questions that we got through our IG post, and we probably don't have time to answer all those. But if you want to, if you do want to direct these questions directly to Farzana, how can folks reach you?
This is great. So I have 2 Instagram profiles. I have my personal one, which is Farzana Nayani, so my first and last name. And I share about my work and all the general things I do. I also have another one called Multiracial Matters. And that's where I do Instagram lives on different things and share a lot of resources. And because I was so inspired by that post and all the questions, I think I might do a segment dedicated to answering all of those, just kind of in a row.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and really just share more in response to those specific things. So I'm happy to do that, and I'm so glad to engage with folks, and just want to thank everyone for sharing their thoughts.
Yes. one more thing. I just remembered one more thing I want to talk about. We have said on this podcast several times that the biggest export the Philippines has had is its people. And like we are, the five of us are proof of that because we are in America right now as we speak because our parents came here to be labor for whatever industry that they worked in. And our origin stories of getting to where we are now are similar to other people's origin stories around the globe because there are Filipinos in Australia, in the Middle East, in South America, and we get everywhere because of our labor. And because of that, there are going to be more multicultural, multiracial, biracial kasamas, right? Like this is going to be a conversation that I hope other folks have, and that to be Filipino is not a monolith, which is what we say in almost every episode. And I got that from Joe. So I want to say, yeah, our transnational global diaspora got us to this conversation and will get us to more conversations about this.
Right, definitely. Joe, can you chime in also about the gender piece? Because, when we look at that, just to tee it up.
Yeah, I mean, as kind of we go into this issue, it's going to be a growing issue because, like Elaine said, more Filipinos are going to continue to migrate to the diaspora. But we also have to kind of consider that the diaspora is very gendered, especially for folks who are settling in these countries. Mainly a lot of them are women. So a lot of multiracial people who are going to grow up might be the mothers might be Filipina and the fathers might be
another race
or another culture, whatever kind of family you kind of come from. So that's going to be an issue. So do you have any thoughts on kind of that and kind of this growing increase of multiracial Filipinos throughout the world?
Yes, I think this is so important that we're bringing it up because I think in every family, there will be a dynamic of someone marrying someone other than Filipinx identity. And because of what you're saying, the globalization and the movement of labor around the world, it's just enhanced. And so what I found is in my survey responses, there were so many different mixes of Filipinx plus something else from around the world. I had folks from Germany, I had folks from Japan, I had folks from North America. So I think in particular, it's important for us to realize this is not just a US phenomenon or Canadian phenomenon. It is everywhere. And if we can be mindful of that in our own community, then we can be more accepting and realize that this dynamic has been going on for decades and, centuries really, right? And it's just so pronounced with the movement of people. So I'm so glad you brought it up because I think in particular in the Filipinx community is something for us to be aware of.
Great.
Well, great. Thank you, Farzana, for doing this, for taking the time. So grateful to spend this afternoon with you. Folks, follow her on Multiracial Matters on Instagram and at Farzana Nayani, her first and last name. And we will link that in the show notes and all that good stuff. Joe, Mike, Ryan, any last words?
No, get her book, Raising Multiracial Children.
Oh, yes. Buy it. It's probably at your local independent bookstore that you could get on Amazon or whatever ordering system that you want to support. Mike, Ryan?
Yeah, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Farzana.
Thank you, everyone.
Best.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Great to see everyone again.
This Filipino American Life is produced by Michael Nailat. Our intro and outro music is by Roger Habon, aka 10.4 Raj. Resident reality checker Girly Colado, legal advisor Rianne Fajardo, and graphic design by Vincent Collyer.